Saturday, March 27th, 1943. Dearest Kitty, we have finished our shorthand course and are now working on improving our speed. Aren't we smart? Let me tell you more about my time killers. This is what I call my courses because all we ever do is try to make the days go by as quickly as possible, so we're that much closer to the end of our time here. I adore mythology, especially the Greek and Roman gods. Everyone here thinks my interest is just a passing fancy, since they've never heard of a teenager with an appreciation of mythology. Well, then, I guess I'm the first. Mr. Van Daan has a cold, or rather, he has a scratchy throat, but he's making an enormous to do over it. He gargles with chamomile tea, coats the roof of his mouth with a tincture of myrrh, and rubs mentholatum over his chest, nose, gums, and tongue. And to top it off, he's in a foul mood. Rauter, some German bigwig, recently gave a speech. All Jews must be out of the German occupied territories before July 1st. The province of Utrecht will be cleansed of Jews, as if they were cockroaches, between April 1st and May 1st, and the provinces of North and South Holland between May and June 1st. These poor people are being shipped off to filthy slaughterhouses like a herd of sick and neglected cattle. But I'll say no more on the subject. My own thoughts give me nightmares. One good piece of news is that the labor exchange was set on fire in an act of sabotage. A few days later, the county clerk's office also went up in flames. Men posing as German police bound and gagged the guards and managed to destroy some important documents. Yours, Anne. Thursday, April 1st, 1943. Dearest Kitty, I'm not really in the mood for pranks. See the date. On the contrary, today I can safely quote the saying, misfortunes never come singly. First, Mr. Kleiman, our merry sunshine, had another bout of gastrointestinal hemorrhaging yesterday and will have to stay in bed for at least 3 weeks. I should tell you that his stomach has been bothering him quite a bit, and there's no cure. Second, Bep has the flu. Third, Mr. Vosculi has to go to the hospital next week. He probably has an ulcer and will have to undergo surgery. Fourth, the managers of Pommeson Industries came from Frankfurt to discuss the news of Opekta deliveries. Father had gone over the important points with Mr. Kleiman, and there wasn't enough time to give Mr. Kugler a thorough briefing. The gentleman arrived from Frankfurt, and Father was already shaking at the thought of how the talks would go. If only I could be there. If only I were downstairs, he exclaimed. Go lie down with your ear to the floor. They'll be brought to the private office, and you'll be able to hear everything. Father's face cleared, and yesterday morning at 10:30, Margot and Pim, 2 ears are better than one, took up their posts on the floor. By noon, the talks weren't finished, but Father was in no shape to continue his listening campaign. He was in agony from having to lie for hours in such an unusual and uncomfortable position. At 2:30, we heard voices in the hall, and I took his place. Margot kept me company. The conversation was so long-winded and boring that I suddenly fell asleep on the cold, hard linoleum. Margot didn't dare touch me for fear they would hear us, and of course she couldn't shout. I slept for a good half hour and then awoke with a start, having forgotten every word of the important discussion. Luckily, Margot had paid more attention. Yours, Anne. Friday, April 2nd, 1943. Dearest Kitty, oh my, another item has been added to my list of sins. Last night, I was laying in bed waiting for Father to tuck me in and say my prayers with me, when Mother came into the room and sat on my bed and asked very gently, Anne, Daddy isn't ready. How about if I listen to your prayers tonight? No, Momsy, I replied. Mother got up, stood beside my bed for a moment, and then slowly walked toward the door. Suddenly, she turned, her face contorted with pain, and said, I don't want to be angry with you. I can't make you love me. A few tears slid down her cheeks, and she went out the door. I lay still, thinking about how mean it was of me to reject her so cruelly. But I also knew that I was incapable of answering her any other way. I can't be a hypocrite and pray with her when I don't feel like it. It just doesn't work that way. I felt sorry for Mother. Very, very sorry. because for the first time in my life, I noticed she wasn't indifferent to my coldness. I saw the sorrow in her face when she talked about not being able to make me love her. It's hard to tell the truth, and yet the truth is that she's the one who's rejected me. She's the one whose tactless comments and cruel jokes about manners I don't think are funny have made me insensitive to any sign of love on her part. Just as my heart sinks every time I hear her harsh words, that's how her heart sank when she realized there was no more love between us. She cried half the night and didn't get any sleep. Father has avoided looking at me, and if his eyes do happen to cross mine, I can read his unspoken words. How can you be so unkind? How dare you make your mother so sad? Everyone expects me to apologize, but this is not something I can apologize for, because I told the truth, and sooner or later, Mother was bound to find out anyway. I seem to be indifferent to Mother's tears and Father's glances, and I am, because both of them are not feeling what I have always felt. I can only feel sorry for Mother, who will have to figure out what her attitude should be all by herself. For my part, I will continue to remain silent and aloof, and I don't intend to shrink from the truth, because the longer it is postponed, the harder it will be for them to accept it when they do hear it. Yours, Anne. Tuesday, April 27th, 1943. Dearest Kitty, the house is still trembling from the after effects of the quarrels. Everyone is mad at everyone else. Mother and I, Mr. Van Daan and Father, Mother and Mrs. Van D. Terrific atmosphere, don't you think? Once again, Anne's usual list of shortcomings has been extensively aired. Our German visitors were back last Saturday. They stayed until 6. We all sat upstairs, not daring to move an inch. If there's no one else working in the building or in the neighborhood, you can hear every single step in the private office. I've got ants in my pants again from having to sit still so long. Mr. Vasculi has been hospitalized, but Mr. Kleiman's back at the office. His stomach stopped bleeding sooner than it normally does. He told us that the county clerk's office took an extra beating because the firemen flooded the entire building instead of just putting out the fire. That does my heart good. The Carlton Hotel has been destroyed. 2 British planes loaded with fire bombs landed right on top of the German Officers Club. The entire corner of Wesselstraat and Single has gone up in flames. The number of airstrikes on German cities is increasing daily. We haven't had a good night's rest in ages, and I have bags under my eyes from lack of sleep. Our food is terrible. Breakfast consists of plain, unbuttered bread and ersatz coffee. For the last 2 weeks, lunch has either been spinach or cooked lettuce, with huge potatoes that have a rotten, Swedish taste. If you're trying to diet, the annex is the place to be. Upstairs, they complain bitterly, but we don't think it's such a tragedy. All the Dutchmen who either fought or were mobilized in 1940 have been called up to work in prisoner of war camps. I bet they're taking this precaution because of the invasion. Yours, Anne. Saturday, May 1st, 1943. Dearest Kitty, yesterday was Dussel's birthday. At first he acted as if he didn't want to celebrate it. But when Meep arrived with a large shopping bag overflowing with gifts, he was excited as a little kid. His darling Lochi had sent him eggs, butter, cookies, lemonade, bread, cognac, spice cake, flowers, oranges, chocolate, books, and writing paper. He piled his presents on a table and displayed them for no fewer than 3 days. The silly old goat. You mustn't get the idea that he's starving. We found bread, cheese, jam, and eggs in his cupboard. It's absolutely disgraceful that Dussel, whom we have treated with such kindness and whom we took in to save from destruction, should stuff himself behind our backs and not give us anything. After all, we've shared all we had with him. But what's worse, in our opinion, is that he's so stingy with respect to Mr. Kleiman, Vasculi, and Bepp. He doesn't give them a thing. In Dussel's view, the oranges that Kleiman so badly needs for his sick stomach will benefit his own stomach even more. Tonight the guns have been banging away so much that I've already had to gather up my belongings 4 times. Today I packed a suitcase with the stuff I would need in case we had to flee. But as Mother correctly noted, where would you go? All of Holland is being punished for the workers' strikes. Martial law has been declared, and everyone is going to get one less butter coupon. What naughty children. I washed mother's hair this evening, which is no easy task these days. We have to use a very sticky liquid cleanser because there's no more shampoo. Besides that, mom's had a hard time combing her hair because the family comb has only 10 teeth left. Yours, Anne. Sunday, May 2nd, 1943. When I think about our lives here, I usually come to the conclusion that we live in a paradise compared to the Jews who aren't in hiding. All the same, later on, when everything has returned to normal, I will probably wonder how we, who always lived in such a comfortable circumstances, could have sunk so low. With respect to manners, I mean. For example, the same oilcloth has covered the dining table ever since we've been here. After so much use, it's hardly what you would call spotless. I do my best to clean it, but since the dishcloth was also purchased before we went into hiding and consists of more holes than cloth, it's a thankless task. The Van Dants have been sleeping all winter long on the same flannel sheet, which can't be washed because detergent is rationed and in short supply. Besides, it's of such poor quality that it's practically useless. Father is walking around in frayed trousers, and his tie is also showing signs of wear and tear. Mama's corset snapped today and is beyond repair, while Margot is wearing a bra that's 2 sizes too small. Mother and Margot have shared the same 3 undershirts the entire winter, and mine are so small they don't even cover my stomach. These are all things that can be overcome, but I sometimes wonder, how can we, whose every possession, from my underpants to father's shaving brush, is so old and worn, ever hope to regain the position we had before the war? Sunday, May 2nd, 1943. The attitude of the Annex residents toward the war. Mr. Van Daan. In the opinion of us all, this revered gentleman has great insight into politics. Nevertheless, he predicts we'll have to stay here until the end of 1943. That's a very long time, and yet it's possible to hold out until then. But who can assure us that this war, which has caused nothing but pain and sorrow, will then be over, and that nothing will have happened to us and our helpers long before that time? No one. That's why each and every day is filled with tension. Expectation and hope generate tension, as does fear. For example, when we hear a noise inside or outside the house, when the guns go off, or when we read new proclamations in the paper, since we're afraid our helpers might be forced to go into hiding themselves sometime. These days, everyone is talking about having to hide. We don't know how many people are actually in hiding. Of course, the number is relatively small compared to the general population. But later on, we'll no doubt be astonished at how many good people in Holland were willing to take Jews and Christians, with or without money, into their homes. There's also an unbelievable number of people with false identity papers. Mrs. Van Daan. When this beautiful damsel, by her own account, heard that it was getting easier these days to obtain false IDs, she immediately proposed that we each have one made, as if there were nothing to it, as if Father and Mr. Van D were made of money. Mrs. Van Daan is always saying the most ridiculous things, and her putty is often exasperated. But that's not surprising, because one day Carly announces, "When this is all over, I'm going to have myself baptized, and the next, as long as I can remember. I've wanted to go to Jerusalem. I only feel at home with other Jews." Pym is a big optimist, but he always has his reasons. Mr. Dussel makes up everything as he goes along, and anyone wishing to contradict His Majesty had better think twice. In Albert Dussel's home, his word is law, but that doesn't suit Anne Frank in the least. What the other members of the Annex family think about the war doesn't matter. When it comes to politics, these 4 are the only ones who count. Actually, only 2 of them do. But Madame Van Daan and Dussel include themselves as well. Tuesday, May 18th, 1943. Dearest Kit, I recently witnessed a fierce dogfight between German and English pilots. Unfortunately, a couple of Allied airmen had to jump out of their burning plane. Our milkman, who lives in Hafwig, saw 4 Canadians sitting along the side of the road, and one of them spoke fluent Dutch. He asked the milkman if he had a light for a cigarette, and then told him the crew had consisted of 6 men. The pilot had been burned to death, and the 5th crew member had hidden himself somewhere. The German security police came to pick up the 4 remaining men, none of whom were injured. After parachuting out of a flaming plane, how can anyone have such presence of mind? Although it's undeniably hot, we have to light a fire every other day to burn our vegetable peelings and garbage. We can't throw anything into the trash cans because the warehouse employees might see it. One small act of carelessness, and we're done for. All college students are being asked to sign an official statement to the effect that they sympathize with the Germans and approve of the new order. 80% have decided to obey the dictates of their conscience, but the penalty will be severe. Any student refusing to sign will be sent to a German labor camp. What's to become of the youth of our country if they've all got to do hard labor in Germany? Last night the guns were making so much noise that Mother shut the window. I was in Pim's bed. Suddenly, right above our heads, we heard Mrs. Van D leap up as if she had been bitten by Mushi. This was followed by a loud boom, which sounded as if a firebomb had landed beside my bed. "Lights! Lights!" I screamed. Pim switched on the lamp. I expected the room to burst into flames any minute. Nothing happened. We all rushed upstairs to see what was going on. Mr. and Mrs. Van D had seen a red glow through the open window, and he thought there was a fire nearby, while she was certain our house was ablaze. Mrs. Van D was already standing beside her bed with her knees knocking when the boom came. Dussel stayed upstairs to smoke a cigarette, and we crawled back into bed. Less than 15 minutes later, the shooting started again. Mrs. Van D sprang out of bed and went downstairs to Dussel's room to seek the comfort she was unable to find with her spouse. Dussel welcomed her with the words, "Come into my bed, my child." We burst into peals of laughter, and the roar of the guns bothered us no more. Our fears had all been swept away. Yours, Anne. Sunday, June 13th, 1943. Dearest Kitty, the poem Father composed for my birthday is too nice to keep to myself. Since Pim writes his verses only in German, Margot volunteered to translate it into Dutch. See for yourself whether Margot hasn't done herself proud. It begins with the usual summary of the year's events and then continues. As youngest among us, but small no more, your life can be trying, for we have the chore of becoming your teachers, a terrible bore. We've got experience, take it from me. We've done all this before, you see. We know the ropes, we know the game. Since time immemorial, always the same. One's own shortcomings are nothing but fluff, but everyone else's are heavier stuff. Fault finding comes easy when this is our plight, but it's hard for your parents, try as they might, to treat you with fairness and kindness as well. Nitpicking's a habit that's hard to dispel. When you're living with old folks, all you can do is put up with their nagging. It's hard, but it's true. The pill may be bitter, but down it must go, for it's meant to keep the peace, you know. The many months here have not been in vain, since wasting time goes against your grain. You read and study nearly all day, determined to chase the boredom away. The more difficult question, much harder to bear, is what on earth do I have to wear? I've got no more panties, my clothes are too tight, my shirt is a loincloth, I'm really a sight. To put on my shoes, I must cut off my toes. Oh dear, I'm plagued with so many woes. Margot had trouble getting the part about food to rhyme, so I'm leaving it out. But aside from that, don't you think it's a good poem? For the rest, I've been thoroughly spoiled and have received a number of lovely presents, including a big book on my favorite subject, Greek and Roman mythology. Nor can I complain about the lack of candy. Everyone had dipped into their last reserves. As the Benjamin of the annex, I got more than I deserve. Yours, Anne. Tuesday, June 15th, 1943. Dearest Kitty, heaps of things have happened, but I often think I'm boring you with my dreary chit-chat. and that you would just as soon have fewer letters. So I'll keep the news brief. Mr. Vasculi wasn't operated on for his ulcer after all. Once the doctors had him on the operating table and opened him up, they saw he had cancer. It was in such an advanced stage that an operation was pointless. So they stitched him up again, kept him in the hospital for 3 weeks, fed him well, and sent him back home. But they made an unforgivable error. They told the poor man exactly what was in store for him. He can't work anymore, and he's just sitting at home, surrounded by his 8 children, brooding about his approaching death. I feel very sorry for him and hate not being able to go out. Otherwise, I would visit him as often as I could and help take his mind off matters. Now, the good man can no longer let us know what's being said and done in the warehouse, which is a disaster for us. Mr. Vasculi was our greatest source of help and support when it came to safety measures. We miss him very much. Next month, it's our turn to hand over our radio to the authorities. Mr. Kleiman has a small set hidden in his home that he's giving us to replace our beautiful cabinet radio. It's a pity we have to turn in our big Philips, but when you're in hiding, you can't afford to bring the authorities down on your heads. Of course, we'll put the baby radio upstairs. What's a clandestine radio when there are already clandestine Jews and clandestine money? All over the country, people are trying to get a hold of an old radio that they can hand over instead of their morale booster. It's true, as the reports from outside grow worse and worse, the radio, with its wondrous voice, helps us not to lose heart and to keep telling ourselves, cheer up, keep your spirits high, things are bound to get better. Yours, Anne.